The Ionic Symphony. Imagine drifting inward, past the skin, the blood, past the quiet hum of your heartbeat, down into the silent spaces of the brain. At first, it seems peaceful, still, soft, almost sacred. But listen closer. There's something beneath the quiet, a vibration, a pulse, a sound so small it makes atoms seem vast. That's the orchestra you were never meant to hear, the hidden concert of ions. Every second, billions of tiny particles, sodium, potassium, calcium, chloride, move through your neurons, crossing invisible borders made of living tissue. They don't just wander, they perform. Each movement has rhythm. Each direction has meaning. Each exchange between inside and outside is a note in the great symphony of your mind. If you could shrink down to the scale of molecules and stand on the surface of a single neuron, you would see something astonishing. It wouldn't be chaos. It would be choreography. Waves of ions shifting like dancers, crossing in perfect timing, never colliding, never missing a beat. They move through gates, microscopic doors made of protein that open and close in response to voltage. Some swing wide for sodium, others slide aside only for potassium. Calcium waits for special cues, entering like a soloist at just the right moment. And somewhere, deep within, chloride moves in counterpoint, keeping the whole ensemble balanced. If the brain is an orchestra, then each neuron is a single instrument, a cello made of living matter, tuned not with strings but with voltage. Its resting tension is about 70 millivolts, a whisper of difference between inside and out, enough to create potential, but not yet music. That tension is the drawn bow before the first note, the silence between inhale and song. A living stillness, alive with the promise of movement. Now picture this, 100 billion of these instruments, each one humming quietly, never touching, yet connected by thin threads of chemistry and charge. They don't play all at once. That would be chaos. Instead, they take turns. Some lead, others follow. Some burst with energy, others keep the rhythm steady. Together they create not noise but structure, the pattern of thought. It's not random sparks in darkness. It's music made of electricity. Sodium, Na+, fast and impulsive, loves to rush in, bringing excitement and motion. Potassium, K+, and steady and reliable, restores calm, bringing the neuron back to balance. Calcium, Ca2+, the dramatic one, appears only at climaxes, releasing neurotransmitters that send messages to other cells. And chloride, Cl, quiet, subtle, grounding, balances everything, keeping the song from running away. Each plays its role with precision. Each knows when to enter, when to retreat. No conductor waves a baton here. The rhythm is built into the structure itself, encoded in gates, gradients, and time. You might think the brain runs on thought, but really, it runs on imbalance. Every neuron depends on difference, a separation between positive and negative, inside and outside. It's this tension that makes life possible. Without it, the orchestra falls silent. Without it, there's no signal, no movement, no mind. It's almost poetic. That consciousness, something so delicate and infinite, rests on something so simple, the push and pull of charged particles. Let's zoom out. From above, the brain looks quiet. But if you could see its true state, you'd witness a storm, not violent, but constant. Electrical waves rolling across the cortex, tiny flashes of light in every neuron, an ocean of activity, forever in motion, yet perfectly contained. The neurons don't fire randomly. Each one listens, each one waits. When its turn comes, it releases a burst of energy, a single spike of voltage, and the sound, if you could hear it, would be a click, soft and quick as rain. Multiply that by billions, and you get the neural rainstorm of thought. Every second, this storm repeats layer upon layer, building waves of rhythm, patterns of logic, memories, sensations, dreams. The entire mind, from heartbeat to hope, is built from that endless vibration. And yet, this isn't cold machinery. There's beauty here. Every neuron is unique. Its shape, timing, and voice slightly different. Some fire with precision, like percussionists in a tight rhythm. Others drift lazily, creating long, slow harmonies that underlie emotion. Their combined work is not random electricity, it's composition. The brain writes its own music, moment by moment, without pause or conductor, without ever repeating the same piece twice. If you could somehow step outside yourself and watch this orchestra play, you'd see that the music never ends. Even when you sleep, the rhythm continues. Softer, slower, but still there, adjusting, restoring, remembering. When you wake, it shifts again. Faster, brighter, louder, ready to compose the next day's symphony. The song of the brain is eternal, but never static. It flows like a river, changes like the wind, breathes like life itself. And here's the quiet wonder. You are both the orchestra and the listener. You don't just hear this music, you are it. Every thought you've ever had, every emotion, every image and dream is simply this current translated into experience. Your consciousness is what the brain's music feels like from the inside. And that is why this story begins not with thought, not with action, but with sound. The faint, constant hum of the Ionic Symphony. The invisible players. If you could float inside a neuron, you wouldn't see wires or sparks. You would see space, vast, fluid, alive with invisible motion. This isn't the empty silence of nothingness. It's a charged silence, vibrating with potential energy, held together by the most disciplined musicians in nature, the ions. They don't have names you can pronounce easily, but they have personalities. Each one has a role, a rhythm, a temperament. They don't look like much, just atoms with too few or too many electrons. But in the brain's performance, they are everything. Sodium, Na+, is the impatient one, always waiting by the door, ready to rush inside the neuron the moment it's allowed. It's the spark plug of the system, the let's go signal of the brain. When a neuron decides to fire, sodium floods in through voltage-gated channels, reversing the charge across the membrane in a flash. In that moment, sodium becomes the heartbeat of thought. Without it, there is no start, no impulse, no idea. But sodium can't stay forever. It's too excitable, too eager. Left unchecked, it would burn the neuron out. So as soon as it rushes in, potassium, please, steps up. Potassium is calm, deliberate, responsible. The true anchor of the orchestra. It lives mostly inside the neuron. And when sodium surges in, potassium gently flows out, restoring balance, cooling the energy, bringing the chaos back into harmony. If sodium is the drummer, potassium is the cellist. Deep, stable, resonant. It doesn't make things happen. It ensures that they happen right. Together, sodium and potassium keep the rhythm, the push and pull of charge, the in and out of current, the expansion and release of energy. Without their dance, the neuron would either freeze or burn. With them, it pulses perfectly. But a good orchestra needs more than rhythm. It needs dynamics. It needs feeling. That's where calcium, Ca2+, comes in. Calcium doesn't appear in every measure. It waits for its cue, the big moments, when the neuron's voltage rises and the membrane trembles on the edge of excitement. Calcium channels open. Only a few ions enter, but their effect is profound. They act like conductors, triggering the release of neurotransmitters, those chemical messengers that leap across synapses and start the song in the next neuron. Calcium doesn't play long solos. It plays climaxes. Sharp, brief, unforgettable. Without calcium, neurons would live and die alone. It's calcium that lets them speak. And in the background, keeping time, maintaining balance, stands chloride, Cl. Chloride doesn't chase excitement. It's the quiet counterpoint, negative where others are positive, restraining when others surge. It shapes the mood of the neuron. When chloride enters, it brings calm, a lowering of potential, a return to rest. Inhibitory neurons use it as their signature, a gentle hand that tells others, slow down, not yet. Without chloride, the brain would be pure chaos, a lightning storm with no rhythm, no form, no peace. Now, imagine watching this performance through a microscope so powerful you could see voltage itself. You'd see flashes of blue and red, color-coded fields of energy. Every spark, every pulse is an ionic exchange, a change of balance between inside and out. Sodium opens the show with a surge. Potassium follows to close it. Calcium adds a flourish, and chloride restores the quiet between acts. Billions of these performances happen every second. Together, they don't make chaos. They make meaning. This might sound mechanical, but it's anything but. The timing of these movements is precise beyond comprehension. A sodium channel opens for a few milliseconds, no more. Potassium follows instantly. Calcium waits for the next voltage shift, a difference of just a few millivolts, the subtlest whisper of change, and the entire neuron transforms. This is coordination at the edge of physics. It's chemistry dancing on the threshold of perception. No orchestra in human history has played with timing so fine. And yet it all happens without a single conscious thought. The neuron doesn't decide to open its gates. It feels them open as voltage shifts and charge flows. It's like a natural reflex, but on the molecular level, self-organizing, self-correcting, beautifully alive. You could almost say the neuron listens to itself, to its own voltage, its own currents, its own inner song. It plays by feel, not by command. And here's what's truly humbling. Every idea you've ever had, every image in your imagination, every note of music you've heard or created, all of it began here, in this invisible dance of ions. Without them, your world would fade. Light would be dark, sound would be silence, and thought itself would vanish like smoke. The universe would still exist, but you wouldn't be there to notice. So, next time you catch yourself thinking, wondering, remembering, pause for a moment. Somewhere inside your skull, a handful of sodium ions have just burst through a gate. Potassium is already following, restoring the calm. Calcium will soon trigger a message to a neighboring neuron, and chloride will step in, quietly closing the curtain. And from that small, perfect sequence, something miraculous happens. a thought, a moment of awareness, a fragment of you. These are the invisible players of the mind, the unseen orchestra of your existence. They don't ask for recognition. They don't even know they're performing. But without them, there would be no mind to ask questions, no self to seek answers, no life to marvel at its own design. Their music doesn't echo in the air. It hums in the silence beneath everything you are. And that's why, in the grand composition of the brain, even the smallest ion deserves a standing ovation. The first beat. Every orchestra needs silence before the sound. Every heartbeat begins with a pause. And inside your brain, that pause has a name: resting potential. It's the moment before motion, the breath before the spark. For the neuron, it's a fragile stillness, a balance so precise that even the faintest whisper of energy can tip it into action. The membrane waits, charged and trembling, holding a steady difference of about 70 millivolts. It's like the air right before thunder, still, heavy, full of promise. The stage is set. The musicians, sodium, potassium, calcium, chloride, stand ready. All they need is a single cue. That cue comes from another neuron, a faint voltage ripple arriving through a synapse. It's not a loud arrival. It's more like a touch on the shoulder, a spark brushing past a fuse. If the incoming signal is small, the neuron sighs, lets it fade, and returns to quiet. But if enough of those tiny signals arrive together, their energies add up, a crescendo, building in microscopic silence until the membrane reaches its magic threshold, around 55 millivolts. That's the moment everything changes. The first beat. In an instant, the gates of sodium swing open. Sodium rushes in like floodwater through a dam. The negative interior flips to positive, a lightning-fast reversal of polarity. It happens in less than a millisecond, but the effect is world-changing. Inside becomes outside. Rest becomes motion. Silence becomes song. This is the action potential, the neuron's voice, its purest, simplest form of speech. It doesn't speak in words, but in voltage. Each impulse is a syllable, a note in the language of the nervous system. Billions of them fire every second, carrying thoughts, movements, sensations, all encoded in rhythm. You might think such a spark would die quickly, but the neuron is clever. As sodium pours in, nearby channels sense the change and open in turn. The wave regenerates itself, leaping from point to point along the axon, never fading, never slowing. Like a flame passed from one candle to the next. The signal doesn't travel through the neuron. It is the neuron, momentarily transformed into motion. And that's the beauty of it. Each cell becomes its own note, its own flash of light in the darkness. The first beat is not just an impulse, it's an announcement. It says, I am alive, I am listening, I am ready. It's the neuron's heartbeat, the rhythm that will, in endless repetition, create everything from pain to poetry. Each spike is tiny, a brief change of about 100 millivolts, lasting no longer than 1,000th of a second. But scale that up, billions of neurons, each firing tens or hundreds of times per second, and you get the roaring quiet of a living brain. It's not chaos, it's coordination, a symphony written in electricity. And yet, for the neuron, this explosion of energy comes at a cost. Every surge of sodium must be reversed. Every bit of potassium that leaves must be brought back in. Ion pumps, tiny molecular machines, work tirelessly to restore order, trading 3 sodiums for 2 potassiums, burning ATP with every cycle. It's exhausting work, but without it, the neuron could never play again. That's the paradox of the first beat. The act of life consumes life. The more the brain thinks, the harder it must work to reset itself. But in that struggle, there's beauty. Each impulse isn't just a mechanical reset. It's a story of tension and release, of energy borrowed and returned. It's the rhythm of being. In fact, the brain spends most of its life in this cycle, charging, firing, restoring, again and again, millions of times per second. The result? Continuity. Your thoughts don't stop. Your awareness doesn't flicker, because the orchestra never sleeps. And yet, there's something poetic about that first spark. Think of a newborn taking its first breath, lungs filling, cells awakening, oxygen rushing in. Now, think of a neuron firing for the first time. It's the same miracle, just quieter. No flash of light, no thunderclap, just a shift of charge across a microscopic wall, and from it, the possibility of consciousness. If you could slow it down, stretch a millisecond into an eternity, you'd see the neuron glow from within. Sodium surging inward like a bright tide, potassium following, the field reversing like a sunrise across its membrane. For a moment, it's not just a cell, it's a heartbeat of the universe. The laws of physics, the equations of chemistry, they all converge here, in this flash of life. And then, just as quickly, the light fades, the gates close, balance returns, the neuron exhales and waits again. This, then, is the first beat of the brain, the primal rhythm from which everything else arises. The orchestra has begun to play. Each neuron contributes its voice, its spark, its song. Together they form the foundation of thought, memory, and awareness. And as the final echoes fade into stillness, the neuron prepares for the next cue. Because in the brain's endless concert, there is no final note, only the eternal repetition of the first. The resting tension before the neuron can sing, it must first tune itself. And tuning, in the language of life, means tension, not the tension of stress or strain, but the elegant pull between opposites, the silent equilibrium that allows everything to move. Inside the neuron, a world of difference exists, a deliberate imbalance, carefully maintained, never collapsing, never resting entirely still. This is the resting potential, the invisible foundation of all electrical life. Imagine a tiny bubble of salt water floating in another ocean of salt water. That's the neuron, a membrane separating 2 worlds, each filled with ions that crave balance but are denied it. Inside, there's more potassium, K+, less sodium, Na+. Outside, the opposite, more sodium, less potassium. Both sides want equality. Both sides long for homeostasis. But the membrane won't let them. It's selective, biased, alive with purpose. Scattered across its surface are microscopic gates, ion channels, each one tuned to a particular rhythm, each deciding who may pass. Some open only for potassium, some for sodium, others for chloride or calcium. But even when they're closed, they leak. Potassium especially slips through in tiny amounts, moving from the inside out, drawn by concentration, resisted by charge. Because as potassium leaves, it leaves behind negative proteins, anchored deep within the cell. Those immovable anions, the orchestra's bass notes, make the inside of the neuron slightly negative. The further potassium drifts, the stronger the electric pull that calls it back. And at some perfect point, the two forces, diffusion and attraction, balance. That's the resting potential, around 70 millivolts, a number small enough to escape the senses, but large enough to define life. It's strange, isn't it? That balance exists because of imbalance. The neuron survives because it's never at peace. Its entire existence depends on maintaining that subtle separation, positive without, negative within. It's not harmony through stillness, but through controlled dissonance. That's the secret of the resting potential. It's not rest at all. It's quiet motion. Deep in the membrane, tiny molecular machines work without pause. They're called sodium-potassium pumps, and they are the unsung heroes of the mind. Each one spends energy, a molecule of ATP, to trade 3 sodium ions out for 2 potassium ions in, 3 for 2, out for in, always unequal. This tiny asymmetry is the price of order, the cost of readiness. Each pump works at the speed of life, billions of times per second, pushing against entropy itself. Without them, the membrane would fade, the neuron's charge would dissolve, and thought would vanish into equilibrium. The brain fights entropy every second and wins by the width of an atom. If you could watch it happen, if voltage were color, you'd see gradients like sunsets across the neuron's surface. A glow of blue inside, a faint red outside, the border flickering as ions slip and swirl. It's not a wall, it's a living threshold, a breathing boundary between two worlds. Every molecule of it, every lipid, every channel, every pump, is part of the system that holds the neuron just barely off balance. That's where power lives, in difference, in the space between. From that tension, everything else emerges. Signals, memories, sensations, all depend on this fragile potential. When a neuron fires, it spends this energy. When it rests, it rebuilds it. It's the biological equivalent of holding a note on a violin string. The bow not yet drawn, but pressure already applied. You can almost hear it waiting. That hum beneath awareness. The soft electrical breath that keeps consciousness alive. But here's what's even more remarkable. This pattern, this uneven distribution of ions, isn't unique to neurons. Every cell in your body holds some version of it. Muscle, skin, heart, all charged, all waiting. The brain simply learned how to use it as language. Where other cells hold potential, neurons speak it. They turn the silent difference into rhythm, signal, and song. The resting potential is the alphabet of thought. Every spike, every pulse, is just a rearrangement of its letters. Yet in this calm before the current, there's something profoundly alive. It's the same balance that holds stars and atoms, the same duality that drives tides and seasons, positive and negative, inside and out, stillness and motion. Every system that endures depends on opposition. Life thrives not by erasing contrast, but by shaping it. The neuron is no different, a tiny universe of asymmetry, always striving, never arriving, and from that constant striving, it gains purpose. So, when we speak of the resting potential, remember, it isn't resting. It's poised, alert, tense in the most elegant way, like a drawn bowstring, like the first breath before speech, like silence that's about to turn into sound. It's the stillness that gives birth to motion, the quiet that makes music possible. Without this invisible difference, No neuron could fire, no mind could think, no life could feel. The resting potential is not the pause between notes. It is the note, the low, continuous tone beneath all of existence. Gates of energy. Before the neuron can sing, it must decide when to open its mouth. Every melody in the brain begins with a gate, a molecular doorway in the membrane where energy, matter, and intention meet. You could think of them as doors in a concert hall, letting musicians step on stage at the perfect moment, or as valves in a cosmic organ, controlling the pressure that becomes sound. They are small, unimaginably so, each one a spiral of protein, twisting and turning through the neuron's membrane like a living lock, waiting for the right key. And the key? Voltage, the most delicate kind of invitation. The resting potential we met before, around 70 millivolts, isn't just a number. It's the tension that keeps the gates closed, the calm before the charge. But even in this calm, there are whispers, small, constant leaks through channels that never quite shut. These leak channels are the background hum of life. They let a few potassium ions slip out, a few sodium ions sneak in, just enough to keep the balance alive. Without them, the neuron would drift, too still to be ready, too rigid to respond. The leak channels keep the system breathing. Then come the voltage-gated channels, the dramatic ones, the true gates of energy. They open not to pressure or chemicals, but to difference. A slight change in voltage, a tremor in the membrane, and they twist open like blooming flowers. At around 55 millivolts, the sodium channels awaken. They sense the voltage shift, like musicians sensing a cue, and the show begins. Each gate opens in a wave, allowing sodium to flood inward, a sudden, dazzling inversion of charge. This is the ignition of the neuron's song, the first note of the action potential. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before that lightning comes, these gates lie in quiet readiness, each holding potential energy, like springs coiled and waiting. Now, if you could stand at the surface of the neuron, you'd see a landscape alive with motion. A sea of shimmering gates, each one responding to the smallest flicker of electricity. Some gates open briefly, others linger. Some are slow to close. They are made of amino acids, the same building blocks as your muscles and hair. But here, they act like living switches, transforming electrical energy into molecular motion. That's what makes them miraculous. They aren't metal or wire, but flesh. And yet, they conduct electricity better than any machine we've built. Some of these gates are even smart. They don't just open from voltage, they listen for chemicals, for neurotransmitters drifting across the synaptic sea. These are ligand-gated channels, the doors of communication between neurons. When a neurotransmitter binds, say glutamate or GABA, the channel changes shape, creating a passage for ions to rush through. It's chemistry turned into electricity, a message transformed into motion. Every thought you've ever had began with that transformation. But the neuron can't just let any ion wander freely. It has rules, laws, a system of permissions and denials written into its structure. Sodium, allowed in, but only briefly. Potassium, welcome to leave, but must return. Calcium, only under strict supervision. Chloride, always lurking, quietly balancing the others. It's bureaucracy at the molecular level, and yet it works with perfect timing, millisecond by millisecond, never losing step. Now imagine this, a faint signal arrives from another neuron. A nudge, a whisper, an electric ripple. It hits the membrane. The gates tremble. Not all of them react. Only those tuned to the right threshold respond. Like musicians who know their cue in the score, they wait until the precise voltage arrives, then open all at once. This threshold, around 55 millivolts, is the magical line between silence and song. Below it, the neuron ignores the world. Above it, the neuron speaks. This is not a gradual decision. It's all or nothing. A neuron doesn't murmur. It fires. Either the gates open in cascade or they stay locked. That's how the brain maintains clarity. No half measures, no static. Each signal is deliberate, each impulse a commitment. But what about the energy behind all this motion? The gates themselves don't use much. They rely on the potential difference, on that built-in imbalance between inside and outside. The work comes later, when pumps must restore what the channels disrupted. Each opening of a gate is a small rebellion against equilibrium. Each closing is a return to order, paid for in ATP. The brain spends up to 20% of the body's total energy just keeping these gates cycling, just maintaining the readiness to fire. It's an orchestra that never stops tuning, even between songs. Think of it like this. Every neuron is a musician holding a tightly wound instrument. The strings are stretched, the charge is waiting, and the gates are fingers poised above them, ready to play the next note at the faintest cue. Too much leak, and the tune falls flat. Too few channels, and the neuron never sings. Perfection, in this case, is not stillness, but responsiveness. The ability to move from silence to sound in less than 1,000th of a second. When we talk about the gates of energy, we're talking about the point where physics meets life. The same laws that govern stars and circuits apply here, but in the neuron, those laws have learned to feel. Every gate opening is a decision. Every pulse is an act of communication. Voltage becomes behavior. Current becomes memory. Flow becomes meaning. And somehow, in the middle of that ceaseless dance, we find awareness. Charge of readiness. Every orchestra has a backstage, a place where the real work happens quietly, far from the applause. For the neuron, that place is the membrane, and the workers backstage are the pumps, tiny molecular machines that never sleep. Their job? To keep the neuron ready to perform, to rebuild the difference that thought depends on, to pay the electric bill of consciousness. We call them the sodium-potassium pumps, but their name hardly does them justice. They are the reason every impulse, every spark of awareness is even possible. Each pump is a microscopic engine, a protein embedded in the neuron's membrane, about 10,000 times smaller than the width of a hair. Yet it does something astonishing. It trades 3 sodium ions out for 2 potassium ions in again and again and again, up to 100 times per second. It's a one-way deal, an unequal exchange, and it's the very thing that keeps the neuron alive. To understand why, picture the neuron as a charged sphere. Sodium wants in, potassium wants out. Both are pulled by gradients, chemical and electrical, that would, left alone, erase all difference. But the pump refuses equilibrium. It spends ATP, the cell's energy currency, to keep sodium and potassium apart, like 2 elements of a musical chord that must never resolve. Each time ATP breaks, its phosphate bond snapping like a spark, the pump changes shape, grabs 3 sodium ions from inside, throws them out, then pulls two potassium ions back in. 3 for 2, out for in, over and over. And that single ion imbalance, that small arithmetic difference, creates the entire stage on which the neuron performs. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. A low hum. The sound of countless pumps working in perfect rhythm. Every neuron contains millions of them, each one burning ATP molecules like tiny candles, releasing energy just to keep the gradient alive. You could call it biological housekeeping, but it's more like maintenance of existence. Because if the pumps stop, the difference fades. And when the difference fades, so does the spark of life. The neuron can't fire. The potential collapses. The music ends. Let's pause for scale. Your brain has roughly 86 billion neurons. Each neuron hosts millions of these pumps. Each pump cycles dozens of times per second, and each cycle burns one molecule of ATP. Add that up, and you'll find something extraordinary. Your brain consumes about 20% of all the body's energy, even though it weighs only 2% of your body mass. Why? Because thought is expensive. Not thinking hard, just existing. Even in your sleep, your brain is a city of glowing pumps, working in shifts, moving ions through invisible gates, keeping the charge steady so that you can dream. You might wonder, why not let nature handle it? Why not let the ions balance out and save the energy? The answer is simple. Equilibrium is death. In life, nothing meaningful happens in balance. Every heartbeat, every thought depends on difference, on tension. If the gradients vanished, the neuron would have no potential left to spend, no way to communicate, no way to be. The sodium-potassium pump is the heartbeat of the silent symphony. Not loud, not fast, but constant. And yet, it's not alone. For every pump, there are other helpers. Chloride channels, balancing charge, AT paces, recharging molecules, co-transporters, shuttling ions to where they're needed most. The neuron is a self-contained ecosystem, an economy of exchange and effort. Every cycle of the pump feeds into a larger pattern. Charge maintained, gradient preserved, readiness sustained. It's the biological version of a marathon runner who never stops moving, never stops breathing. Always one step from action. There's something poetic about this. The energy you use to imagine, to listen, to love, comes from a microscopic engine that trades sodium for potassium. The warmth in your thoughts is ATP breaking apart in the darkness of your cells. And that's the quiet wonder of it. You are powered not by lightning, but by a slow, constant pulse of chemistry. Your neurons are batteries, charged by imbalance, held at the edge of action, waiting for the next spark of voltage to say, "Now, go." But every battery needs to be recharged. Every pump must have fuel. That's where mitochondria enter the scene. The cell's power plants, floating nearby like lanterns. They burn glucose, turning it into ATP, feeding the pumps, so that the neuron can keep its silent vigil. When energy runs low, in exhaustion, starvation, or disease, the pumps slow down. The gradients weaken, the orchestra falters, and the first thing you lose isn't thought, but clarity. The rhythm of neurons slips, their signals blur, and awareness begins to fade. Energy, in the brain, isn't luxury. It's structure. It's identity. It's the rhythm of readiness. So when we say the brain is active, what we really mean is that it's ready. Every neuron charged, every gate tuned, every pump working quietly in the background, maintaining the sacred difference between inside and out. The entire network, billions of cells, trillions of ions, exists in a state of potential. Not motion, not rest. Potential. That's the music before the first note. The silence that hums with power. When the next impulse comes, the neuron will spend this energy in a single, blazing instant, and then begin again, charging itself back to readiness. That's life, at the atomic scale, a cycle of tension, release, and renewal. The sodium-potassium pump is the hand that winds the clock. The charge it maintains is the ticking of time itself. And every second you're alive, every thought you think, is a note played on this infinite, tireless, molecular piano. The rush of sodium. It begins with a whisper. A few faint signals arrive, tiny ripples from neighboring neurons. Each one nudges the membrane just a little, like pebbles thrown into a calm lake. At first, nothing happens. The neuron listens, waiting, measuring, holding its breath. Then, the signals begin to overlap. Each ripple meets another, their waves merge, and the calm surface begins to tremble. When that trembling reaches 55 millivolts, the silence breaks. The gates of sodium swing open. You could call it a flash flood or a lightning strike. But those are too slow. This is faster than any thunder. In less than 1,000th of a second, billions of sodium ions rush in, a white surge of positive charge pouring across the membrane. For that brief electric instant, the world inside the neuron flips. Negative becomes positive. 70 millivolts becomes plus 30 millivolts. It's called depolarization, the first movement in the dance of ions. If you could see it, you'd witness something dazzling. The sodium channels, those protein gates embedded in the membrane, open in perfect unison. They don't creak or hesitate. They respond to voltage like synchronized dancers, each one sensing the exact millisecond when it's time to move. They twist open, forming pathways through which sodium floods inward, driven by both concentration gradient and electrical attraction. Because inside the neuron is negative, and sodium, being positive, rushes toward it like metal to a magnet. The result is a surge of energy, pure and unstoppable. It's not chaos, it's choreography. For a fleeting moment, the neuron becomes a beacon of charge. Its inside glowing with positivity, its outside relatively negative. That reversal creates a tiny electric field, one that will spread like a spark down the neuron's length. This is the action potential, the nerve impulse, the electrical signature of life in motion. But here's the beautiful paradox. It's both violent and precise. The sodium channels open only briefly, about 1 millisecond before they close again, locked by their own timing mechanism. Like sprinters who burst from the gate, run their short race, and collapse. Then, new channels ahead open, and the wave moves forward. If the neuron were a coastline, sodium would be the rising tide. Each section of membrane, as it's touched by the wave, changes its charge, first negative, then positive, then back again. But the tide doesn't flow freely. It regenerates itself as it moves, each bit of membrane triggering the next, like a string of falling dominoes. That's how the signal travels, not as a single spark, but as a series of self-renewing flashes. The speed is astonishing. In unmyelinated fibers, bare, thin axons, the impulse might move at 1 to 2 meters per second, about 3 to 6 Mach. But in myelinated neurons, Wrapped in insulating layers of fat, the signal can race up to 120 meters per second, roughly 270 miles per hour. That's faster than a cheetah, faster than a jetliner taking off. And yet, it's happening inside your skull right now, in billions of neurons, every time you blink, think, or remember. The brain is not just active, it's alive with speed. But back to the sodium. Once the rush begins, it can't be stopped halfway. It's an all-or-nothing event. Either the threshold is reached and the neuron fires, or it isn't, and the silence continues. That binary rule, yes or no, on or off, is the foundation of all neural logic. It's how your brain encodes everything from heartbeat rhythm to the memory of your first kiss. Every idea, every sensation, is made of countless such yes or no bursts, flowing and combining in endless patterns. The orchestra plays in binary, but the melody feels infinite. Now, what happens after the flood? For the neuron, it's both triumph and crisis. It's just fired, fulfilled its purpose, but it's also thrown its inner chemistry into chaos. There's too much sodium inside, too little potassium, and the charge is dangerously unbalanced. Left alone, it would remain frozen, unable to fire again. So immediately, the next act of the dance begins. The sodium channels close, not softly, but with mechanical precision, and potassium channels open in their place. Potassium begins to flow outward, restoring the balance, returning the inside to its familiar negativity. That's the recovery phase, the calm after the flash, the story of the next chapter. But for now, the sodium wave is the neuron's heartbeat. It's the pulse that carries information, the spark that travels down the axon, the burst of life that says, "This thought matters, pass it on." And when billions of these waves fire in harmony, your brain becomes an ocean of light, its rhythms forming the code of perception, the pattern of being. All from sodium, pouring through a membrane, in silence. The universe, it seems, has always loved music, and in your neurons, it found a way to play. The calm of potassium. After the storm of sodium, the neuron breathes out. Its inside, once flooded with positive charge, now glows with imbalance. It's alive, but unstable. A bright flame that must fade before it can burn again. And that's when potassium takes the stage. If sodium is the spark, potassium is the settling ash, the graceful counterpoint that restores the rhythm. As the sodium channels slam shut, a new set of gates begin to open. The voltage-gated potassium channels. They are slower, calmer, more deliberate. They respond not to the beginning of change, but to its peak, opening only after the voltage has risen high, around plus 30 millivolts. For a brief instant, both worlds, sodium and potassium, coexist. But where sodium rushes inward, potassium moves the other way, flowing out of the cell, carrying its positive charge away. That single motion, millions of K+ ions leaving through their selective pores, is what we call repolarization. The neuron exhales its energy, returns toward rest, and the internal voltage drifts downward again, past 0, past 70, sometimes even lower, to around 80 or 90 millivolts. That overshoot is called hyperpolarization, a moment of deep calm, like the stillness after thunder. If you could zoom into the membrane now, you would see a ballet of order restoring itself. The potassium channels aren't random holes. They are exquisitely selective filters, able to tell potassium from sodium by the tiniest difference in size and hydration shell. Sodium, though smaller, carries water molecules more tightly, too bulky to pass through. Potassium fits perfectly. It's as if nature carved a lock for a single key, and that key, shaped by evolution itself, turns smoothly every time. That precision, atomic, mathematical, divine, is what gives the neuron its rhythm. The outward flow of K+ restores the negative potential inside the cell. But it does more than that. It creates direction. Because as the impulse moves down the axon, the areas behind it hyperpolarize, their potassium gates still open, while those ahead remain untouched, still resting. This ensures that the signal moves forward, never backward. No confusion, no echo. Just one clean wave, marching in perfect sequence from soma to synapse. The calm of potassium, then, is not silence, it's structure. It gives the neuron its sense of direction, its rhythm between action and recovery. Without it, signals would blur, neurons would refire endlessly, and thought itself would dissolve into noise. This is one of the brain's greatest tricks. It uses stillness to preserve meaning. Potassium is that stillness, but the calm does not come instantly. Even after the spike ends, the potassium channels remain open a little too long, a few extra milliseconds. During that time, the neuron is refractory, unable to fire another impulse. It's a kind of reset period, a breath between sentences, a pause that prevents chaos. This delay is crucial. Without it, signals could collide, circuits could short, the harmony of the brain would turn to static. Instead, potassium ensures that each note, each impulse is distinct, separate, ordered in time. That's why your thoughts don't overlap into one endless blur. Inside the neuron, the returning potassium changes more than charge. It shifts the internal chemistry, the balance of ions, the osmotic pressure, the electrochemical tension. Each variable carefully tuned by the cell's pumps and channels to bring the system back to its resting potential of about 70 mmHg. And just when the equilibrium returns, the sodium-potassium pump takes over again, restoring lost sodium and potassium stores, charging the neuron for the next impulse. The cycle repeats: fire, recover, rest, prepare. An eternal dance between excitement and peace. If the sodium rush is the shout, then potassium is the sigh. It's the neuron's way of saying, "It's okay, we're stable again." Every time your heart beats, every time you move your eyes, that sigh happens billions of times in perfect synchrony. Potassium, quiet and invisible, is the guardian of rhythm, not of sound, but of timing. And timing, in the brain, is everything. Because when impulses line up, when neurons fire in pattern, that's when meaning emerges. A movement, a thought, a feeling. Without potassium's calm, the melody of the mind would drown in its own noise. There's a subtle beauty here. We often think of energy, of motion, as the essence of life. But the neuron teaches us something deeper. Life is also restraint, the ability to stop, to reset, to wait for the right moment. The calm of potassium is not the end of the song. It's the rest between notes. And without rest, there is no rhythm. Without rhythm, no thought. When the final K+ channel closes, the neuron settles once more into its resting state, polarized, balanced, waiting. Outside, sodium gathers, impatient for the next invitation. Inside, potassium returns, serene in its role as the keeper of calm. Together, they've danced their brief duet, a single electrical heartbeat in the vast symphony of the brain. And already, somewhere nearby, another neuron begins its rise. the spark of calcium. Every journey, no matter how small, must find its destination. For the neuron, that destination lies at the end of its long, thin axon, a microscopic terminal, curved like a fingertip reaching for another. The signal that began as a whisper, as a rush of sodium and a breath of potassium, now travels forward, a wave of voltage, steady, precise, unstoppable. And when it finally reaches the end, something miraculous happens. The electric storm turns into chemistry. At the tip of the axon, the membrane is different, not made for passing impulses along, but for translating them. Here, the neuron prepares for connection. Tiny spheres, vesicles, float near the edge, each filled with molecules of neurotransmitter, the chemical words of thought. They wait in silence, hovering just beneath the surface, tethered by protein strands, ready to release their message into the gap beyond. But they can't act alone. They need a signal, a final key to unlock the door. And that key is calcium. When the action potential reaches the terminal, it changes everything. The voltage, once racing along the membrane, now triggers a new set of channels, the voltage-gated calcium channels. These are unlike the sodium or potassium gates before them. They don't open for speed, they open for meaning. And when they do, the outside world rushes in. Calcium ions, Ca2+, abundant in the space outside the cell but scarce within, flow inward in a gleaming cascade. Each calcium ion carries a double charge, a surge of potential energy, and within microseconds, the inside of the terminal lights up with possibilities. It's here that electricity becomes communication. The incoming calcium binds to a special sensor protein, synaptotagmin, attached to the vesicle's surface. That one connection, that molecular handshake, is enough to trigger the grand finale. Synaptotagmin changes shape, grabs the machinery that holds the vesicle in place, snare proteins, and pulls them tight, like ropes drawing a ship to dock. Then, in a flash, the vesicle fuses with the membrane. The neurotransmitters spill outward, spreading into the narrow space between this neuron and the next. That gap, just 20 nanometers wide, is the synaptic cleft, and across it, the message travels not as current, but as chemistry. Pause for a moment and imagine the scale. All of this, the voltage, the calcium, the vesicles, happens in less than 1,000th of a second. Yet billions of these tiny explosions happen across your brain every instant. Each one a note, a phrase, a heartbeat of cognition. Every word you speak, every memory you recall is built from these flashes of calcium and clouds of neurotransmitter. But calcium's role doesn't end there. It's not just a messenger, it's also a conductor. The amount of calcium that enters determines how many vesicles release their cargo. More calcium means stronger transmission. Less means weaker, a fine-tuned control that allows neurons to regulate the strength of their conversation. It's like the volume knob of the brain. Too little calcium, and signals fade into whispers. Too much, and they become deafening noise. Balance is everything. And when its job is done, calcium must vanish. Instantly, because too much of it, lingering inside the neuron, can be toxic. So the cell employs pumps and buffers, swiftly sweeping calcium back out or storing it inside small compartments called endoplasmic reticulum. Within milliseconds, the spark is gone, leaving no trace but the chemical echo it created. This is the alchemy of thought. Electricity gives way to chemistry, and chemistry gives rise to communication. Every impulse, every flash of sodium and potassium culminates in this, the release of meaning from one neuron to another. A single calcium ion, entering through a narrow channel, can set off an entire cascade of consciousness. From this, networks form, patterns emerge, and somewhere in the middle of it all, you. If sodium was the shout and potassium the sigh, then calcium is the whisper of connection. It bridges the silence between cells, carrying not just charge, but intention. It's the spark of empathy, the physical embodiment of "I heard you." And through this delicate exchange, billions of times every second, your brain weaves its great conversation of motion, memory, and mind. The neuron that fires does not speak alone. Its calcium-driven message travels to the next, translated into another impulse, then another, and another, until whole regions of the brain light up in harmony. That is the true Ionic Symphony, a collaboration, a resonance of charge and chemistry that transforms solitude into meaning. And when the spark fades, when the vesicles have emptied and the calcium has gone, the neuron rests once more, quiet, ready, waiting for the next cue. The performance never ends. It only breathes. And with each breath, the song continues, ion by ion, cell by cell, thought by thought. The path of the signal. The spark begins at one point, a single patch of membrane, a tiny explosion of sodium and potassium. But a neuron is long. Some stretch as far as a meter, from the spine to the toes, and one small spark, by itself, could never reach the end. So the neuron does something brilliant. It turns that spark into a wave. The action potential is not a bullet. It doesn't shoot forward and vanish. It's more like a domino effect, a chain of perfectly timed reactions, each triggering the next. At every millimeter of the axon, new sodium channels open, new bursts of current ignite, while the previous ones fade into calm. The signal doesn't move through the neuron. It moves along it, recreated step by step, like a flame passing along a fuse. That's why neuroscientists call it a self-propagating wave. Each section of membrane fires, recovers, and then waits. The signal behind it fades into silence, while ahead of it, the next section awakens. The result is seamless motion, a continuous surge that races down the axon without losing power. You could imagine it as light traveling through a field of reeds. The wind moves through them, bending each stalk in turn. The reeds don't move far, but the wave of motion sweeps across the field. That's what the neuron does. Its molecules stay in place, but the voltage wave flows from one patch to the next, an elegant relay of electricity and time. The process is called local circuit current flow. When one region of the membrane depolarizes, it becomes positively charged inside. The regions ahead are still negative. So, naturally, current flows forward, positive charges drifting along the inner surface toward the still negative zones. That small current is enough to nudge the next sodium gates open, and the next section fires. Step by step, ion by ion, the wave moves onward. This is the path of the signal, an invisible current that never truly travels, but is constantly reborn. What's astonishing is that this all happens with perfect coordination. No conductor, no master clock, just physics and timing. Each ion channel knows when to open and close based purely on voltage and delay. And yet the result feels alive, intelligent, deliberate. It's as if the neuron breathes, inhaling charge, exhaling calm, moving in rhythm with itself. That rhythm is what lets thoughts exist, not static, but flowing. Inside your brain, this happens billions of times per second. Every sensory neuron carries its own stream of impulses. Touch, heat, sound, sight, all racing toward the cortex. The signals travel down myriad axons like glowing threads, each carrying its fragment of the world. And though they all move at slightly different speeds, their timing converges with astonishing precision. That's why you can see, hear, and feel in perfect synchrony. Your brain is a network of waves, not chaotic, but orchestrated, as though the universe itself had learned to conduct electricity with grace. But the signal isn't immortal. Each wave leaves behind a trail of silence, the refractory zone, where sodium channels are inactivated and potassium is still flowing out. This ensures that the signal only moves forward. Backward motion is impossible because the membrane behind the wave is momentarily deaf, unable to fire again. That's how the neuron enforces order, direction, logic. Without it, signals would bounce endlessly, loops of chaos ricocheting through the brain. Instead, the wave moves with certainty, always forward, never back. And though the physics is simple, the result is profound. Each traveling pulse is both temporary and eternal, vanishing at the origin, reborn at the front. It carries no matter, only meaning. The ions themselves don't journey. They dance in place, passing their energy like relay runners handing off a baton of charge. That's how a thought travels, not by motion of matter, but by transfer of pattern. From a single spark to a sustained wave, from a local disturbance to a message that crosses the body, this is the neuron's art. It doesn't need copper wires or external power. It runs on salt and time, and with those, it carries love, fear, memory, reason, everything that makes you, you, all on the back of ions flowing through a membrane thinner than smoke. When the wave finally reaches the axon terminal, it slows, not in speed, but in intent. It prepares for the great handoff, from electric to chemical, from charge to meaning. That handoff, the calcium spark you've already witnessed, is where the wave ends, and a new message begins. But for every journey that finishes, 1,000 more begin behind it. The brain never stops. It's an ocean of waves, each one carrying a note in the infinite symphony of thought. Saltatory conduction, speed. That's what evolution was after. Because thinking, reacting, surviving, they all depend on time. And nature, the master engineer, found a way to make the brain's signals travel not just faster, but astonishingly fast. The trick was not in stronger currents, nor in bigger neurons, but in insulation. Enter the unsung hero of the nervous system, the myelin sheath. It's not glamorous, no sparks, no colors, no action, just layer upon layer of fatty membrane wrapped tightly around the axon like electrical tape on a wire. But what that simple wrapping does is nothing short of magic. It changes the way signals move, from a steady crawl to a lightning-fast leap. Imagine a message traveling down a bare wire. It leaks energy all along the way, slowing, fading, dissipating. Now wrap that wire in insulation. Suddenly, the current stays inside. It moves farther, faster, without losing strength. That's exactly what myelin does for your neurons. Each wrapped segment of the axon keeps the charge contained, allowing the voltage to travel passively beneath it, almost without resistance. The signal doesn't need to regenerate at every point anymore. It jumps from one exposed gap to the next. Those gaps are called the nodes of Ranvier. And this beautiful process, this dance of leaps and pauses, is known as saltatory conduction, from the Latin saltare, to leap. In a non-myelinated fiber, the impulse might crawl at 1 meter per second, about 3.3 feet per second. But with myelin, that same signal can blaze at 120 meters per second, around 270 miles per hour. That's faster than a jetliner taking off. Think about that. Inside your body, tiny pulses of voltage are racing through microscopic wires at the speed of a storm. And every move you make, every thought you think, depends on that speed. Zoom in on a myelinated axon, and it looks like a string of pearls. Each pearl, a myelin segment, each gap, a node of Ranvier. The charge, instead of trickling evenly along the surface, rushes through the inside of the axon, reaching each node with just enough energy to spark the next wave of sodium entry. It's a relay race. Fast, efficient, rhythmic. The myelin ensures that the charge doesn't leak away, while the nodes refresh the impulse, keeping it alive mile after microscopic mile. Here's the poetic part. The neuron's message isn't continuous, but it feels continuous. The signal appears to flow smoothly, but in reality, it's a series of jumps, micro-pauses, too fast to detect. The brain, quite literally, thinks in leaps. It's as if each idea vaults across a gap, lands, and leaps again, momentum carrying it forward in an unbroken cascade of insight. But there's more. Myelin doesn't just make things faster, it makes them smarter. By reducing the need for constant ion exchange, it saves the neuron enormous energy. Fewer sodium and potassium channels mean less pumping afterward, less ATP burned. That efficiency is why complex animals like humans can afford huge brains without overheating or collapsing from exhaustion. It's biological elegance at its finest, speed without waste, motion without chaos. And yet, for all its perfection, myelin is fragile. When it breaks down, as in diseases like multiple sclerosis, the leaps turn to stumbles. The signal slows, then falters, then stops altogether. What was once a swift, rhythmic current becomes a broken whisper, a static-filled memory of motion. It's a haunting reminder that even the fastest systems depend on quiet, invisible guardians. In healthy neurons, though, the wave continues, a ballet of precision. The voltage surges under each myelin wrap, slides smoothly for millimeters, then erupts at the next node, a momentary flash of sodium and potassium before diving under the sheath again. The timing is flawless. The spacing between nodes, about 1 millimeter, is tuned for maximum speed and efficiency. If the nodes were closer, energy would be wasted. Farther apart, the signal would die before the next leap. Evolution found the sweet spot. And from that balance, the nervous system gained its grace. Every sensation you feel, from the brush of wind on your skin to the pulse of your heartbeat, travels this way, jumping, resting, leaping again. Your thoughts are literally saltatory. Each neuron sings not in a continuous hum, but in bursts of rhythm, spaced perfectly in time and distance. It's a kind of biological Morse code, dots and dashes of voltage, spelling out meaning at the speed of life. So the next time you blink, catch a falling glass, or remember the words of a song, pause for a moment. Somewhere deep inside your brain, 1,000 signals just leapt across their invisible gaps, flashing like lightning in the dark. And though you never feel it, the miracle happens, again and again. Each leap, a tiny defiance of time itself. The refractory gates. Every great rhythm needs a rest. Every melody, a pause. Without silence, music becomes noise. Without order, fire becomes chaos. The neuron knows this rule by heart, because even as it blazes with electricity, even as ions surge and swirl through its gates, there comes a moment when it must stop. That moment is called the refractory period. After the action potential, after the sodium rush and potassium calm, the neuron enters a brief window where it simply cannot fire again. No matter how strong the signal, how urgent the message, the gates remain closed. This is not failure, it's wisdom. It's the neuron's way of saying, wait, let me reset. There are two kinds of waiting. The first is absolute, the absolute refractory period. During this phase, the sodium channels that cause the great spike are inactivated, not closed, not resting, locked. Their molecular doors are sealed shut, their keys turned backward. No amount of stimulation can reopen them until the cell has fully recovered its original voltage, around 70 millivolts. For a fleeting millisecond, the neuron is untouchable, a blank slate, a forced silence. And that silence is sacred. It prevents confusion. It stops signals from colliding, from racing backward, from turning the orchestra of the brain into feedback noise. Then comes the second kind of pause, the relative refractory period. Here, the potassium channels are still leaking, and the inside of the neuron is more negative than usual, hyperpolarized, around 80 or 90 millivolts. It's not impossible to fire again, but it's harder. The threshold, normally 55 V, is now farther away. It's as if the neuron says, I'll respond, but only if you really mean it. Only a strong enough signal, a deliberate push, can wake it up again. This is how the brain filters noise from meaning. Pause here. Think about how brilliant that is. Your neurons, through nothing more than voltage and time, create a rhythm. Not just firing, but resting, recovering, and deciding what deserves attention. That rhythm is what gives rise to focus. If every signal fired endlessly, you'd drown in sensation. Every thought would overlap. Every emotion would blur into the next. Instead, the refractory gates enforce separation. They make time real inside your mind. In the grand symphony of the brain, these pauses are like rests between beats. Tiny fractions of a second, but absolutely essential. They give each impulse a place to exist, a distinct note in the melody of perception. Without them, neural signals would overlap, cancel, distort. Meaning would collapse into noise. With them, the brain becomes a sequencer, a temporal artist, layering impulses with precision and purpose. There's a hidden poetry to this restraint. We often think of intelligence as speed, faster thoughts, faster reactions, more data per second. But the neuron reminds us wisdom lives in the pauses. In its refusal to act too soon, the brain finds order. In its deliberate slowness, it discovers clarity. You are not just a creature of motion, but of rhythm, of alternating stillness and surge. That's what makes consciousness stable, not the firing, but the timing between the firings. During these refractory moments, ion pumps work tirelessly behind the scenes, restoring gradients, rebalancing sodium and potassium. ATP, the currency of life, is spent like coins to reset the stage for the next performance. Each pump pushes 3 sodium ions out, pulls 2 potassium ions in, cycle after cycle, restoring that fragile polarization that makes all future thought possible. In every neuron, in every instant, this quiet maintenance continues, the unseen rhythm beneath the rhythm. And then, just as quietly as it began, the restriction lifts, the gates reset, the charge equalizes. The cell, calm again, waits for its next cue. In that readiness, you can almost hear it breathe. A single neuron, invisible and silent, holding the potential for a universe of thought. When you pause between words, between breaths, between moments of understanding, you're echoing the same rhythm. Every thought, every realization is built on these micro pauses woven into your biology. The brain doesn't just create rhythm, it is rhythm. It fires, rests, waits, and fires again, forever cycling between tension and release, like waves against the shore. And perhaps that's why even silence in the mind can feel alive. Because deep beneath it, millions of refractory gates are waiting, poised on the edge of readiness, holding their breath, listening for the next spark that will start the song anew. The synaptic bridge. Every river ends somewhere, and every spark of electricity in your brain must find a place to land, a place to become more than charge, more than movement. That place is the synapse, the narrow bridge between one neuron and the next, where electricity becomes meaning. It's here that thoughts stop being private, that one cell reaches out and another listens. And though the gap is unimaginably small, just 20 nanometers wide, it's the most important distance in the universe. Because across it, your mind is built. At the end of the axon, the neuron's terminal swells like a bulb, a tiny landing pad called the axon terminal. Inside it float dozens of synaptic vesicles, microscopic bubbles filled with molecules of neurotransmitter. Each vesicle holds a fragment of language, a chemical word, a packet of potential meaning. Some vesicles carry glutamate, the excitatory shout. Others hold GABA, the inhibitory hush. Others still, dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, the messengers of desire, mood, and motion. They wait patiently in the terminal, anchored near the membrane, ready for their cue. Then, as the electrical impulse races down the axon and reaches the terminal, it triggers the great handoff. Voltage-gated calcium channels open and Ca2+ pours into the cell as if the sea itself had rushed in through a crack in the hull. Those calcium ions are the signal, the final, silent command. They bind to the vesicle proteins, synaptotagmins, the molecular sensors of readiness, and set the stage for fusion. At that moment, the vesicle and the membrane become one. Proteins, snares, pull the two layers together, twisting like ropes until they merge. The vesicle bursts open, and its contents, thousands of neurotransmitter molecules, spill into the synaptic cleft. They scatter like notes in the air after a chord, diffusing across the narrow space between two cells that never touch. It takes only 1/1000th of a second. And yet, in that instant, a thought changes hands. On the other side, the receiving neuron waits, its surface studded with receptors, molecular microphones tuned to specific frequencies. Each neurotransmitter is a key, each receptor a lock. When the key fits, the receptor opens, an ion channel, a second messenger system, a spark of new potential. If the signal excites, positive ions rush in, sodium, calcium, nudging the cell closer to firing its own impulse. If it inhibits, negative ions, chloride perhaps, flow in instead, making the inside more negative, more still. Thus, the neuron listens, not in words, but in polarity. And here's the beauty. No two synapses are the same. Each has its own sensitivity, its own probability of release, its own rhythm of communication. Some are fast and crisp, firing in milliseconds. Others are slow and modulatory, lingering, shaping the tone rather than the timing. Together, they form a language more intricate than any human tongue, a grammar of voltage and chemistry where meaning emerges from pattern, not from a single word. But the story doesn't end with release. After the message crosses the gap, the neurotransmitters must be cleared. Otherwise, the signal would echo endlessly. Some molecules are broken down by enzymes like acetylcholinesterase, which slices acetylcholine in half, ending its effect in a heartbeat. Others are pulled back into the terminal through reuptake transporters, recycled and repackaged for the next message. And some are taken up by nearby glial cells, the neuron's silent partners, who help maintain the chemical balance of the brain. In every case, the message is precise, delivered, received, and erased with perfect timing. Now imagine the scale of this. Each neuron forms thousands of synapses, and you have around 86 billion neurons. That's more synapses than there are stars in the Milky Way. And in every one of them, this same ritual unfolds: voltage, calcium, fusion, release, binding, reset, millions of times per second. It's not just communication, it's choreography. The brain is a living cosmos, and each synapse is a star blinking in rhythm with thought. The synaptic bridge is more than a structure. It's a metaphor for everything that connects us. Each neuron reaches out across emptiness, trusting that something on the other side will listen, will respond, will understand. And isn't that what we all do? Across languages, across silence, we send out signals, hoping someone will catch them, hoping our meaning will cross the gap intact. That's what every synapse does, billions of times each second, a living testament to the power of connection. When you learn, when you remember, when you feel, these synaptic bridges strengthen. New receptors appear, more vesicles line up. The connection grows faster, surer, deeper. Your brain rewires itself, not by building new roads, but by reinforcing the bridges that already span the gaps. That is how thought becomes habit, how experience becomes memory. The bridge is life. The language of receptors. Every message needs a listener, every note an ear. Across the synaptic gap, the neurotransmitters drift like scattered words from one cell's tongue to another's waiting ear. And there, in that thin membrane of the postsynaptic neuron, lie the receptors, the listeners of the brain's hidden language. They are not passive. They do not simply receive, they interpret. Because each receptor doesn't just hear a signal, it translates it into action. Some respond with immediacy, others with patience. Some open gates, others summon cascades. Together they speak the language of possibility. The first dialect is the ionotropic. These receptors are fast, lightning fast. When a neurotransmitter binds, they open a pore in the membrane, a direct tunnel for ions to flow. Glutamate opens sodium or calcium channels, excitatory, bright, pushing the neuron toward action. GABA, in contrast, opens chloride channels, inhibitory, soft, pulling the neuron back towards silence. Each binding event lasts mere milliseconds, but in that time, the receptor decides whether to whisper go or wait. The neuron listens to thousands of these voices at once, tiny votes of excitement and restraint, and the sum of those votes determines whether it will speak next. This is democracy at the molecular scale. Each receptor has one vote, each ion one fraction of influence, and out of billions of these micro-decisions, a single thought is born. Then there's the second dialect, the metabotropic. These are slower, subtler, the poets of the synaptic world. When a neurotransmitter binds to a metabotropic receptor, it doesn't open a channel directly. Instead, it sets off a cascade, a chain reaction through G proteins and second messengers, rippling through the cell like a signal fire passing from tower to tower. These cascades can last for seconds, minutes, even hours. They don't just change the membrane potential, they change the neuron itself, altering how it will respond next time, tuning its sensitivity, shaping its plasticity. This is the language of learning, of long-term modulation, of slow sculpting. Where ionotropic receptors shout, metabotropic ones whisper. But their whispers echo far longer. Together, these two dialects form the brain's version of syntax and tone. Ionotropic signals define the immediate meaning. Fire now. Stay silent. Pass it on. Metabotropic signals shape the context. How easily should you fire next time? What mood should color your responses? Should this path be remembered or forgotten? It's not just the presence of neurotransmitter that matters, it's where it binds and how its receptor chooses to interpret it. The same molecule, say, dopamine, can excite one neuron, inhibit another, and modulate a third. The message is never absolute. It's relational, dynamic, contextual, just like meaning in language, where the same word can comfort or wound depending on how it's said. Zoom in further, and you'll see this diversity mirrored even within one neuron. On its dendrites, hundreds of receptor types cluster in intricate patterns. Some form postsynaptic densities, tiny scaffolds rich with proteins, anchoring receptors in precise spots. Others drift freely, roaming the membrane, seeking new places to listen. This architecture determines not only what a neuron hears, but how it feels about it. Signals arriving close together can reinforce one another, their depolarizations adding up. Others, spaced apart or opposing, cancel each other out. In this spatial ballet, the neuron doesn't just receive information, it composes it. Every synapse, then, is a sentence in a vast conversation. The ionotropic phrases are quick, the language of reflexes, instincts, flashes of thought. The metabotropic phrases are contemplative, the language of learning, emotion, mood. And as they mix, your brain produces not mere logic, but feeling. The joy of recognition, the calm of safety, the urgency of danger. All emerge from the interplay of excitation and inhibition, of channels and cascades. But like any language, this one can be distorted. Too much glutamate, and the brain burns itself out, neurons firing to death in a storm of overexcitation. Too much GABA, and thought slows, awareness dims, the music fades to a murmur. Balance is everything, because meaning without moderation is noise. Your brain's entire existence depends on that equilibrium, the eternal dialogue between go and stop, between spark and silence. And here's the profound truth. This language never sleeps. Even now, as you read these words, millions of receptors are opening and closing, listening, deciding, translating. They're weaving sensation into perception, perception into memory, memory into understanding. Every moment of awareness is a conversation across trillions of molecular mouths, a whispering parliament of meaning. The world enters you not through words, but through ions, translated into chemistry, then into consciousness. That is the miracle of the synapse. It lets the physical become the mental, the measurable become the meaningful. The sum at the hillock. Every neuron is a listener first. Before it speaks, it listens, it waits, it measures. And when it finally answers, that answer isn't impulsive. It's the result of thousands of voices, each synapse whispering its vote into the silence. All those voices converge at one tiny, crucial place, the axon hillock, a small rise at the base of the cell body where thought becomes action. It is here that the neuron decides whether to pass the signal forward, whether to fire. Imagine the hillock as a grand meeting hall. All the dendritic inputs arrive like delegates, each carrying a message. Some say, "Yes, let's fire." Others insist, "No, stay quiet." Each excitatory input depolarizes the membrane a little, moving it closer to threshold. Each inhibitory input hyperpolarizes it, pulling it farther away. And the neuron, patient as a judge, integrates them all, moment by moment, microvolt by microvolt. This process is called summation, the blending of countless synaptic inputs into one decision. There are two ways the neuron adds them up. Spatial summation, signals arriving from different places on the dendritic tree combine their effects, like instruments in harmony. And temporal summation, signals from the same synapse arriving in rapid succession, stacking up like the beats of a drum. If the timing aligns, the rhythm builds. If not, the energy fades before the next note arrives. In this sense, the neuron doesn't just calculate, it feels time. It listens for patterns. It distinguishes rhythm from noise. At the hillock, voltage-gated sodium channels lie in wait, ready to open if the threshold, around 55 millivolts, is reached. Below that, they remain silent. Above it, they unleash a storm. When enough excitatory potentials overcome the inhibitory ones, the balance tips. The hillock ignites. A wave of depolarization races outward, and the neuron fires its action potential, its electric declaration of understanding. It's the neural equivalent of saying, "Yes, this matters." But here's the beauty. No single input decides this alone. Even the strongest synapse is just one voice among thousands. The neuron is a consensus builder. It waits for patterns of agreement, for coordinated rhythms of excitation that rise above the murmur of inhibition. It doesn't shout at random. It speaks only when there's meaning. That's what keeps your brain from chaos. A billion quiet votes happening every millisecond, each cell deciding what's worth transmitting and what's better left unspoken. The inhibitory signals play a sacred role. They're not the enemies of thought. They're its sculptors. They carve away excess firing, sharpen timing, define contrast. Inhibition is what gives structure to excitation, just as silence gives shape to sound. Without it, your brain would convulse in uncontrolled activity, like an orchestra with no rests, no rhythm, no form. Inhibition is discipline, the mind's internal harmony. It ensures that only coherent messages survive, only patterns that make sense are allowed to propagate. When a neuron fires, it's not the victory of one signal, but the harmony of many. It's democracy, physics, and poetry all at once. And that decision, to fire or not, isn't just an abstract computation. It's the moment of creation. Because that spike, that single pulse of voltage, is what allows information to travel, to leap from one mind cell to another, from matter into motion. Every action you take, every memory you recall, every heartbeat, every thought is built on that same decision, repeated billions of times a second throughout the living circuitry of you. Zoom out for a moment. Imagine a storm of neurons, each summing inputs, each waiting on its own hillock for the threshold to tip. Some fire in synchrony, others in sequence, each signal rippling through the network like waves in a neural sea. From those waves, patterns emerge. Perception, attention, emotion. This is how the brain thinks. Not in words, but in thresholds, in delicate balances between excitation and restraint. And in that balance, there's wisdom. A neuron that fired too easily would flood the system with noise. A neuron that never fired would contribute nothing at all. But the one that waits, that listens, that weighs the sum, that's the neuron that speaks truth. Because truth in the brain is never a single impulse. It's the sum of thousands of tiny agreements, a momentary consensus among flickering lights. So the axon hillock isn't just a point of departure, it's a threshold of meaning. Every action potential that leaves it carries the distilled essence of all the signals that came before. It is the brain's way of saying, I have listened, I have understood, now I will respond. And when that signal races down the axon to find the next synapse, the cycle begins anew. Another bridge, another translation, another act of connection in the infinite music of thought. Rate, temporal codes. Every neuron speaks in pulses, tiny bursts of electricity that last a single millisecond, yet carry the weight of meaning. But if each spike looks the same, how does the brain tell one message from another? How can sameness create thought, emotion, memory? The answer lies not in the spike itself, but in how often it comes and when. The brain's language is not one of words, but of rhythm. Not sentences, but patterns. Not letters, but timing. This is the code of frequency and time. The simplest form is the rate code. Imagine you're listening to rain. A few slow drops mean drizzle. A rapid downpour means storm. Neurons work the same way. The faster they fire, the stronger the signal. A gentle touch on your skin causes a few neurons in your somatosensory cortex to fire sporadically. Press harder, and the spikes come faster, dozens per second, encoding intensity in rhythm. In your visual system, a bright light speeds up the firing of retinal neurons, while darkness slows them down. In your auditory system, the louder the sound, the denser the bursts. Frequency becomes meaning. The neuron doesn't need to say what the stimulus is, just how strong it is. The brain decodes the rest by comparing patterns across populations. It's simple, elegant, and yet not enough. Because sometimes timing matters more than quantity. Enter the temporal code. Imagine not rain, but music. The spaces between the notes define the melody. So it is with neurons. It's not just how fast they fire, it's when they fire, and how their spikes align with others. In your auditory cortex, neurons can fire in perfect synchrony with a sound's frequency, a one-to-one lockstep up to hundreds of hertz. This allows you to distinguish a flute from a violin, a heartbeat from a drum. Temporal patterns also define speech, rhythm, even the sense of movement. In the hippocampus, neurons called place cells fire in a precise sequence as you move through space, forming a temporal map of your path, a living narrative of your journey. Your brain is, in essence, a composer of timing. Rate and temporal coding are not rivals, they're partners. The rate tells how much. The timing tells when and why. Together they create syntax, a neural grammar that allows the brain to represent complex phenomena with astonishing efficiency. Picture a choir. If every singer shouted louder, you'd only get volume. That's rate coding. But if they sing in harmony and sequence, melody emerges. That's temporal coding. Both are necessary. Both define the music of thought. The brain, of course, never stops at simplicity. It layers codes upon codes, population coding, where meaning emerges from patterns across many neurons. No single cell knows the full picture, but together they encode form, motion, memory. One neuron might represent the start of a visual edge, another its angle, another its motion direction. When they fire together, the brain recognizes this is a face, this is movement, this is danger. This distributed coding makes the system resilient. No thought depends on one neuron alone. The message is in the pattern, not the part. And yet, even in this chaos, there is order, rhythms that unite entire regions, oscillations, waves of synchronized firing sweep through the cortex like tides, sometimes slow, like theta waves of drowsy thought, sometimes fast, like gamma bursts in focus and perception. These rhythms modulate the codes within them, setting the tempo of communication between networks. When two regions oscillate in sync, they can exchange information efficiently. When they fall out of rhythm, communication falters, like musicians losing the beat. Your awareness, your attention, your sense of presence all depend on these invisible metronomes. The brain is not just a collection of signals, it's a symphony of timing. Think of the mind as a grand concert hall. Each neuron plays its part, some fast, some slow, some loud, some subtle. When you think, you are conducting billions of musicians across thousands of orchestras, all improvising yet somehow coherent. And when the timing clicks, when the frequencies align, the melody becomes consciousness. That's why the silence between spikes matters as much as the spikes themselves. In that silence, the brain waits, listens, decides. It anticipates the next note. It holds tension. And in that tension, meaning lives. And so the question returns, how does the brain know what a thought means if it's only made of spikes? The truth is, the meaning is in the pattern. Just as letters alone mean nothing until they form words and sentences, spikes mean nothing until their rhythms align. It's not the electricity that matters, it's the pattern of its dance. Each burst of firing is part of a temporal geometry, a choreography of light and pause, of peaks and silences woven across billions of cells. That's what you are, not static matter, but pattern in motion. Brain rhythms. If the brain were an orchestra, then its rhythms would be the tempo, the invisible pulse that holds the music together. Even when you're still, when your eyes are closed and your body rests, your neurons are not silent. They hum, they oscillate, they breathe in waves. Look closer, and you'll find that the brain's activity is not random chaos. It pulses in rhythms, each with its own tempo, its own meaning, its own mood. These are the brain waves, the great tides of consciousness. The slowest of them all is the delta wave, a gentle roll of electric calm, 1 to 4 cycles per second. You find it in deep sleep, when the mind sinks into silence and the body repairs itself. It's the hum of recovery, the baseline of the unconscious. A bit faster, theta waves, 4 to 7 hertz, the rhythm of dreams, of drifting thoughts, of that strange place between wakefulness and sleep. Artists know it. Meditators live in it. Children often dwell there naturally, in the twilight zone of imagination. It's where creativity hides, waiting to be invited. Next comes the alpha rhythm, 8 to 12 cycles per second, the heartbeat of calm wakefulness. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and your occipital lobes begin to sing in alpha. It's not sleep, and not full alertness either. It's the resting mind, peaceful but awake, balanced between thought and silence. Monks chase it, office workers lose it. And if you've ever had a moment where time seemed to slow down, where you were aware yet serene, that was alpha's gift. Then the rhythm quickens. Beta waves, 13 to 30 hertz, dominate your mind as you think, decide, plan. They're the rhythms of focus, of conversation, of problem solving. They rise when you open your laptop, when you do math, when you argue online with strangers. Beta is alert, sharp, active, but it has a cost. Too much beta, and the music turns to noise. That's when stress sneaks in, when your thoughts loop, when your inner voice won't shut up. Your brain then isn't overactive. It's just playing too fast. And at the upper edge of perception live the gamma waves, 30 to 100 hertz, the lightning of the mind. These are the rhythms of integration, binding together sensations and memories into coherent perception. When you recognize a friend's face, when you grasp the meaning of a sentence, when understanding flashes, that's gamma. It's the solo at the peak of the symphony. Brief, bright, breathtaking. Each rhythm flows into the next, overlapping like tides in an ocean of thought. Sometimes they harmonize. Other times they clash. In deep meditation, theta and gamma can intertwine, the dreamer and the genius sharing the same space. During REM sleep, alpha fades while beta flickers, the brain rehearsing reality within imagination. And in moments of insight, you can almost feel the shift, a synchronization across lobes, as though the mind itself caught a groove. But what are these rhythms for? They are not just side effects. They're coordination tools, timing mechanisms that let billions of neurons speak in sync. Imagine a massive concert with no conductor. Each musician listens and adjusts to the pulse of others. That's your brain. These oscillations organize communication, like Wi-Fi channels separating signals so they don't interfere. Slow waves link distant regions, broad coordination across the brain. Fast waves fine-tune local circuits, precise control, microsecond timing. And together, they form a nested hierarchy. Slow beats carrying fast melodies, just as delta and theta rhythms envelop beta and gamma bursts. It's fractal, elegant, alive. Sometimes, though, the orchestra loses sync. When delta dominates while awake, your thoughts slow, attention drifts. Too much beta, and anxiety surges, the brain stuck in overdrive. In certain disorders, these rhythms fall apart entirely, as if the conductor walked off stage. That's why researchers now explore how neural entrainment using sound, light, or magnetic pulses can gently nudge the brain back into tune. The results are early but promising. Music therapy, binaural beats, even rhythmic breathing all influence the brain's oscillatory landscape. You can literally retune your mind. So next time you feel unfocused, tense, or foggy, remember, it's just your rhythms, a little out of sync. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, slow your internal tempo. You're not fighting your brain, you're bringing it back into harmony. Because your thoughts aren't random static, they're waves in motion, rising and falling in patterns as ancient as life itself. And somewhere in those waves, amid the hum of billions of cells, your mind is singing. It's not loud, it's not chaotic. It's a quiet, constant melody, the rhythm of being. That's the sound of you, alive, aware, and endlessly oscillating. The cost of a thought. Every spark has a price. Every idea burns a little fuel. Your brain, that magnificent tangle of neurons, is an energy addict. It weighs just about 1.4 kilograms, 3 pounds, barely 2% of your body mass, and yet it consumes about 20% of your total energy. Think about that. 1/5 of everything you eat, every breath of oxygen, every molecule of glucose goes straight into thinking, remembering, and imagining what to eat next. It's easy to forget that thought is physical. It feels light, effortless, like wind passing through the mind. But under the hood, it's a storm of electrical and chemical motion. Every time a neuron fires, sodium rushes in, potassium rushes out, and the Na plus K plus pump, the tireless janitor, must restore the balance. For every 3 sodium ions it ejects and 2 potassium ions it drags back in, it burns 1 molecule of ATP, the universal currency of energy. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is like a coin with 3 sparks. Break 1 bond and out comes a jolt of usable power. Your neurons spend billions of these coins every second just to keep the voltage steady, the gradients right, and the thoughts flowing. Even at rest, when you're not solving problems, not daydreaming, not even conscious, the brain hums like an idling engine. This baseline activity is called the resting metabolic rate, and it keeps everything ready for the next impulse. The cost of a single action potential, a single spike of voltage, is minuscule, on the order of 10 to 9 joules. But your brain generates billions of them per second. Altogether, that's about 20 watts, the same as a dim light bulb. So yes, your thoughts literally glow. Most of that energy goes not into new ideas, but into maintenance, keeping gradients in place, recycling neurotransmitters, resetting synapses. In other words, most of the cost of thinking is the cost of being ready to think again. It's like an orchestra tuning between pieces. More energy goes into preparation than into the performance itself. Still, the brain is incredibly efficient. A supercomputer might need megawatts to simulate a fraction of what your neurons do effortlessly. The human brain performs about 1016 operations per second, yet runs on the energy of a banana. If your laptop had that kind of power efficiency, it would run for months on a single charge. So next time you forget your keys, don't blame your neurons. They're doing miracles on a shoestring budget. But that efficiency comes with limits. Energy isn't free, and the brain must constantly choose where to spend it. When you focus intensely, solving a math problem, learning a new skill, arguing online, certain regions light up in glucose consumption scans. At the same time, other regions dim, as the brain reallocates fuel to wherever the thinking fire burns brightest. You can't think about everything at once, because you can't pay for everything at once. Attention, then, is an economy. Focus is investment. And fatigue, that's bankruptcy. Even creativity has its metabolic price. During moments of insight, those aha flashes, the brain briefly synchronizes networks across distant regions, burning more glucose in seconds than usual in minutes. It's like fireworks, brilliant, short-lived, costly. That's why after deep creative work, you feel physically drained. Not emotionally, literally biochemically depleted. So when people say, thinking too much tires me, they're not being dramatic. They're describing a real metabolic truth. Neurons run on ATP, and the brain stores almost none of it. Every second, it depends on a constant supply of oxygen and glucose from blood flow. Cut that supply for just 10 seconds, and consciousness fades. For a few minutes, and neurons begin to die. That's how fragile thought is, a masterpiece built on oxygen and sugar. But here's the poetry of it. From this fragile, fuel-hungry machine emerges everything: art, music, love, science, memory. Energy becomes emotion. Glucose becomes philosophy. Every idea you've ever had was paid for in chemical currency. And the more complex your thinking, the higher the cost. The brain, in a way, is the most elegant spender in the universe, burning itself just enough to create meaning, but never so much as to collapse. So yes, thinking burns calories. A long day of mental strain won't make you lose weight, but it will make your neurons sweat. And that's beautiful, because every spark you spend is proof of life, the quiet electricity of a mind that refuses to rest. So next time you sit in silence, lost in thought, remember, every idea has a price, and you're paying it willingly, in ATP, in effort, in the glowing hum of 20 watts of wonder, because that's what consciousness costs, and it's worth every joule. The takeaway. It began with silence, a charged stillness beneath the surface where sodium, potassium, and calcium waited in poised imbalance, the quiet before the note. Then came motion. The gates opened, the ions danced, and the neurons sang. Each flicker, each voltage change was not chaos but choreography. From those microscopic movements rose the first melody, the resting potential, the pulse of readiness. A neuron at rest was never truly still. It was tuned, like a violin waiting for the bow. Then the bow struck. Sodium rushed in, the bright crescendo. Potassium followed, the fading echo. A single spike of light shot down the axon like a spark racing along a wire. That was the action potential, the heartbeat of thought. Billions of such pulses flashed every second across the grand orchestra of the brain, each one a syllable in the silent language of electricity. But sparks alone do not make meaning. At the end of the line, where one neuron meets another, a delicate bridge formed, the synapse. Here, calcium entered like a conductor, signaling vesicles to open, spilling neurotransmitters into the waiting gap, a whisper across the void, a leap of faith between cells. Some signals excited, some inhibited, some said, go, others, wait. And together, through their delicate balance, the mind made sense of chaos. Electrical impulses became chemical speech, and that speech returned to electricity again. It was a cycle, ion to pulse, pulse to message, message to code. The synapse was not an ending, but a transformation. It was there, in the fragile gap of 20 nanometers, that thought first became possibility. Then the patterns began. Spikes wove into rhythm, rhythms into waves, waves into meaning. Some coded frequency, how strong, how loud, how much. Others coded time, when, how long, in what order. From these two dimensions, rate and timing, the brain built a universe of symbols. A neuron by itself could only shout or stay silent. But together, they formed syntax. They formed music. They formed you. Because what is a thought if not a pattern? a dance of ions shaped by memory, lit by attention, and sustained by energy. Every burst of sodium and wave of potassium carries the memory of what you are. Your laughter, your fear, your love, they all shimmer in electrical phrases, encoded by molecular musicians playing inside your skull. And this entire performance is powered by a quiet flame. Energy drawn from food, from air, from every heartbeat. 20 watts of wonder, keeping a symphony alive. You are not made of static things. You are made of motion. Your thoughts are not frozen records, but living currents, forever changing, forever composing. From ion to impulse, from impulse to network, from network to awareness, the path is seamless but invisible. No single neuron knows what it's doing. No cluster understands the whole. Yet together, they hum with impossible coherence. It's the mystery of emergence, how meaning arises from motion, how consciousness arises from chemistry. If you trace the line back, past memory and reason, past sensation and dream, you'll find yourself at the threshold of charge, at the level of the ion, the spark, the pulse. This is where thought begins. Not in philosophy, but in physics. Not in the abstract, but in the dance of sodium and potassium. And yet, somehow, from that dance comes the self, the storyteller behind the eyes. The beauty of it all is not that we can understand it, but that it happens at all. That out of matter and motion comes awareness. That out of ions and gradients comes the quiet voice saying, I am. The brain's song never truly stops. Even in sleep, its rhythms continue. Even in silence, its charge hums beneath the surface. The Ionic Symphony has no final note. It only changes tempo, shifts key, and keeps playing. So as you breathe, as you think, as you wonder about yourself wondering, so remember this. You are not a passenger in your brain. You are the music it makes. Every thought you've ever had was born in an electric whisper. Every dream you'll ever dream begins with a single ion crossing a membrane. And every time you pause to feel that, you are, in that moment, hearing the universe thinking through you. The symphony never ends. It simply moves, from one movement to another. We've listened to the ions, watched sodium and potassium compose the spark, heard the first whispers of thought in the space between neurons. But this was only the overture, because no neuron sings alone. Each spark finds another and another until 1,000 lights become a constellation. What happens when the single pulse becomes a pattern? When thousands of neurons begin to synchronize to build meaning from rhythm, memory from motion, and perception from pulse. That's where we go next. Beyond the membrane, beyond the synapse, into the vast architecture of the brain. We'll see how signals turn into sight, how frequencies become faces, how patterns of electricity become the feeling of, I am here. We'll meet the networks, the visual maps, the sensory circuits, the quiet hierarchies that let the mind perceive the world and itself within it. The question is no longer how neurons fire, but why they fire together. Because when billions of small voices align in harmony, something greater emerges. A thought, a choice, a self. The Ionic Symphony gave us the notes. Next time, we'll learn to read the score.